guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 9 of our roll top desk build. Well, when we left the show last week, we had just done all of the routing for the Tambour tracks and done a dry fit of the desk with the upper desktop in place. Now, today I have glued the upper desktop together with those 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch splines that I showed you last week. But I really don't like the front edge of this particular assembly. So we're going to head over there and round over that front edge with a 1/4 inch roundover bit. I didn't want to go with a 3/8 as much as like a drastic profile like what I did on the desk surface and the upper desk top surface. I wanted something a little more subtle. So we're going to go with a 1/4 inch. We can always take more off later if we like something different. But you can't put it back once you've taken it off. And we can see with a simple 1/4 inch roundover how nicely that softens that edge. I really just didn't like that crisp, sharp edge on the front like that. So it's up to you. If you want to round it off, round it off. If you want to leave it sharp and crisp, by all means, it's your prerogative, it's your desk. Well, now we're at the stage of the game that we need to make the tambour. And you need to decide at this point which one you want to do. Actually, you should have decided before you routed the Tambour track, so you know what width to route. For me, as you know, I'm going to be doing the router-made tambours, and I did do the tutorial video on that, which you guys can check out to remind yourself of how to do it. Now, each 2 individual slats of that style takes up approximately 1 1/8 of an inch in thickness along your tambour track. So I calculate that the full width, because each strip of 1/2 inch thick stock when making the router made tambours, each strip makes 2 of those. So each strip will take up 1 1/8 of an inch approximately. So I calculate roughly that I'm going to need 23 strips. So now it's all a matter of doing the milling for that, and that's a fairly long process. But I'm going to do the milling, and then I will get back to you as far as exactly how many we ended up needing for this project, so that you can update your records if you have the plans and you can write in. The plans really don't tell you how many you need. They do, but they don't tell you what method they're referring to. Long story, check out the plans. You'll know what I'm talking about. Either way, guys, I'm going to mill all that 1/2 inch thick stock, and it needs to be at least 51 inches wide to give us extra to trim on either edge. So mill it up, and then we're going to make the tambours at the router. Well, now that you've got all your 1/2 inch stock milled out, I've jointed one edge of the board and I've marked it with a chalk arrow just to show me which side is the right one. And now for these router made tambours, we're just going to cut strips that are 1 15/16 of an inch wide. So now that all the stock is cut to 1 15/16 wide, we're going to follow the directions of the router bit set that makes the tambours. And as I said earlier, if you don't remember that video, take a break here, go back and watch router made tambours on my show, and you'll see exact the exact process of how to do it. We don't need a video of that on this particular build. That was the whole purpose of making that tutorial previously, was so that we did not have to include this in this particular show. So guys, I'm going to make this tambour, and I will see you when I get back. And hopefully we'll have a completed tambour sliding through our slots for our tambour in our upper desk side panels. And if you're using the router method, it's just a matter of, once you finish the last processes that I just showed you, cut them to length and slide them together and get them into your tambour track. It's good to have an assistant. Just put your tambour together. Well, now that we have all the tambour slats put in the desk, and they're just temporarily in there, we need to make the lift bar, and that will be the bar that goes down here that houses the handles for this. And for our lift bar, we're going to make it 1/2 inch thick. It'll be 2 inches wide and 49 inches in length to coincide with these tambour slats. As well, we need this top stretcher here, and that stretcher will also be 2 inches wide. Now it calls for 3/4 inch stock. I may see how that fits up there. I'm thinking that I might change that to 1/2 inch. I'll try a piece of 3/4 and see how we make out. As well, I think I told you that I calculated it to be 23 of those double slats. Actually, it was 21. So there you go, there's an update on it. And you can see that this just rolls up inside and it comes down here. Now there will be a panel back here that covers this up. Not that it's ugly, but it prevents things from getting caught on the tambour and you know, preventing it from opening. So there we have it. There is the tambour done for this particular project. And now we just need to make the lift bar and the stretcher. Now this lift bar of our tambour has a 1/16 round over on all 4 edges here, and as well it has that socket routed into it, the same as our tambour pieces, so that it will mate up with it. And we'll see if I can do this without hurting myself. That would be a good thing. And then it just slides along into the mating tambour pieces, just like that. And then we'll push it up into our tambour track. As such. There we go. and then we'll push our whole assembly back so that we're not causing it to fall onto the ground. And that would be the tambour completed, with the exception, of course, of our handles, which we will put on, and we'll probably do that next once we get this stringer put up on the top section here. Well, we are done with the dry fit, and the upper desk is now fully attached to the lower desk, and for all intents and purpose, this project is finished. You could use this just the way it is, and it is a beautiful piece of furniture as is, but we are going to carry on even further with it with the inner cubbies and stuff. But something I wanted to discuss, some of you will be disappointed by the fact that I didn't film the assembly of this upper desk, and the reason for that is basically the size of my shop. My wife came out to help with that assembly, and with the two of us finagling this large piece of furniture around in such a small area, it just wasn't a good idea. We just didn't have the space to place the camera and the tripod, etc., etc. Something would have gotten damaged, and it probably would have been my camera equipment. So I'd like to go through the process of the assembly with you now, so that you can know how to do your own. I'm going to start off with this top stretcher here across the top of the tambour, which finishes this whole assembly off very nicely. The thing with that assembly piece, or this stringer, stretcher, whatever you want to call it, is that I initially cut one that was 1/2 inch thick, and I absolutely was not happy with that whatsoever. I ended up replacing it with a 3/4 inch piece, 3/4 of an inch thick, 2 inches wide, and 48 inches long. I did an 1/8 inch round over on the bottom front and back faces just to clean it up and give it a softer edge, and then that was glued in place to our sides of our upper desk. I was a little concerned of wood movement here bowing in and out, so I also put a piece across the back from front to back to help support it, because if this were to bow in even just a little bit, it could possibly jam your tambour, and you wouldn't want that. So just one support piece. Once that was in, the next step was to attach the top, and that is done with those tabletop clips that I mentioned earlier. So for that, we'd already cut our kerf in our side pieces and our back panel, but we also needed to cut one before gluing it in, obviously, into our front stretcher, whatever you want to call it. That was the next step, was attaching this with our tabletop clips. Once all that was done, we put the tambour in place and essentially added the handles, and everything was fine with that. We just get the tambour out of the way here. The back of this upper desktop is held in place with 4 2-inch screws. So for that, we aligned everything, making sure that we had 48 inches between our side panels at the front here, and placed the marks at the back for our screws. Drilled down through and then countersunk the underside, and obviously pre-drilled our screw holes and screwed the back together. But now there's nothing to support this front edge. For that, the plans call for a 3/8 dowel. So I drilled a 3/8 hole up into our side panels, and using a doweling center, I was able to align everything and mark the holes. Now, I really didn't like the way that that held together. So what I did was, on the underside of the desktop, I routed this. And basically it's a slot that will allow me to put a screw up into the top, but will still allow movement of the upper desktop. As I've told you earlier, it's not going to expand or contract on the long grain. It's going to be on the sides of the pieces, or the cross grain. So with that screw, it's not cranked down. It will still allow movement back and forth while still giving a good, solid, secure hold down of our desktop sides. From there, it was just a matter of getting up underneath and getting our tabletop clips into the kerfs that we cut and screwing them in place. And I have to tell you, it's a horrible process because you have to get your hands inside the drawer holes, and depending on how long your arms are, that might be a bit of a stretch. I was fully extended to get that done. But we got the tabletop mounted. I also wanted to add some clips in the front here, and I had not cut a kerf. So what I did was I used a biscuit joiner, set it for 3/8 of an inch down, and put a couple biscuit notches in that front edge of our face frame panel, and I was able to attach some clips in the front edges as well. So now that that is done, the next thing that we need to do is we need to install our back panel here that I spoke of in last week's show. So let's have a look at what we need to do for that. Well, for this back panel, we're going to hold it in place with a couple of cleats. And what I've got is I've cut a 3/4 by 3/4 inch by 12 inch long piece of scrap oak. And we're going to glue it and brad nail it to the sides of our desk panels. Now, just something you want to be careful of with the glue and the squeeze out is you don't want to glue it to the desk surface, because you still want this to be able to be separated at some point in time. So just a little bit of glue and a few brad nails, and let's shoot this, this cleat in place. And I don't know how well this is going to translate on the camera, but we'll try it. We're just going to line up this piece. I have a mark inside to show me where I've wanted it. I've already done some dry fits. And with the square there, we're going to line it up with my line a little further. And once we're happy with that placement, I'll shoot a couple brads in it. It's a little awkward, especially working around the camera. But we'll manage. We always do. There we go. There's one cleat installed. We've got a little tiny bit of squeeze out there, and we'll just clean that up and install the cleat on the other side. And now that you have those cleats installed, before the glue has a chance to fully set up, take your Tambour for a test drive sort of thing and make sure that it's clearing that cleat. Now, I have rounded off the top back edge of each one of them just to make sure that there's no sharp edge that it could possibly hook on. But there's plenty of clearance here. I'm happy with that. And now we can cut the panel. And for the panel, we're going to be using 1/4 inch oak plywood. I've got the panel cut to 48 inches long and 13.5 inches wide. I added a couple small little glue blocks there just to prevent it from bowing in and jamming against the Tambour, and a couple strips of glue on either side. Nothing serious. We're just going to slide it up into place, and I'm going to secure it with some 5/8 inch brad nails once I get it centered here on this setup that we've got. And we'll just do the other side. and that would be our back panel installed. Now the only purpose of this back panel really, other than to hide the tambour, I don't know why you'd want to hide it, it's gorgeous, but once we get this shelving unit with the cubbies installed here, if anything should go in behind, we're not going to risk jamming that into our tambour and preventing our tambour from opening and closing. So now that that panel's in place, we need to move on to our cubbyhole section. So let's head over to the bench and have a look at the prints. Well, here we are back at the plans, and we're going to be making this section right here. And what this is basically the cubby hole and drawer shelf that will get inserted into this tambour upper desk section. And this step is optional, of course, but I don't know. I think that this cubbyhole section is what makes this desk so darn sexy. So I'm going to be doing this with mine for sure. And the problem is here is that if you want to do it, the plans with their extensive, in quotation, kind of thing, instructions say nothing about how to go about making this section other than you're only limited by your imagination. Well, what if your imagination isn't very good at figuring this stuff out and you react better to actual instruction? Well, I guess you're up the creek, but not to worry, because you'll be able to follow the instructions that I'm going to give you here. Bottom line here, guys, is that all of the stock in this entire cubbyhole section is all 1/2 inch thick red oak, or whatever species you're using, and they will all be to a width of 7.5 inches. So what we can do is mill as much stock as you feel you're going to need for this whole cubbyhole section, and make sure that it's all wide enough to accommodate 7.5 inches. We will rip it all to that width, and then we're going to come back and talk about our dados that need to be cut in all of these pieces in order to get our assembly together. Well, I've got all the 1/2 inch stock milled and cut to its width, and truth be told, due to milling, etc., I didn't get my 7.5 inches of width on the stock. I only got 7 inches. But I'm okay with that because I gain 1/2 inch of desk space, and from what I can see on these plans, this is basically a guideline. So they say 7.5, you can go 8.5 if you want, you can go 9, you can go 10. As long as it clears the tambour, what difference does it make the size you make it? So I'm content with the 7.5 inches. So now that I've got that width established and all the pieces are all cut, I just want to let you know that the key to this is consistency. So when you're cutting all your pieces, I cut all the widths at the same time, making it so that they're all identical, so that even if I screwed up equally on all pieces. And in this particular instance, it's not going to make a difference. So let's just have a look at the plans and see exactly what kind of lengths of material we're going to need. Well, I think that what I'd like to do is concentrate on the major components of this particular shelving unit, which would be our longer upright pieces and our shelf units right here. We can see by the print that it is 12.25 inches from the inside edge to the inside edge of these two uprights. Now they're dadoed in halfway through on a 1/2 inch board. So to this measurement of 12.25, we're going to have to add 1/4 inch on each side, making that actually 12.75. And that will give us the proper shelf lengths. So whatever we do on this side, we have to do on this side. So let's start off by cutting our 3 longer shelf lengths of 12.75 inches. We've got those 6 shelves cut,
And now I want to move on to cutting these uprights. And there are 4 at the same length. They'll be 12 inches high. Now you can see here that they have the whole height from the bottom of this cubby hole section to the top at 12.5 inches. I'm thinking that I'd like a thicker top on mine than 1/2 inch, and it'll just be capping this whole assembly as opposed to being dadoed in. So for this, I'm going to cut it back by 1/2 inch to allow for the thickness that they have here on the plans of this top 1/2 inch piece. So I need 4 pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, at 12 inches long. Well, I have all my uprights, my spacers, my shelves. Again, except for the top cap, I have them all cut to length and ready to go. And from here, it's just a matter of choosing my pieces and cutting the dados that will go to allow each shelf to be glued and pinned in place. Now, set up your dado blade for 1/2 inch thickness and test it on some scrap to make sure you've got it set right. Your dados will be 1/4 inch deep, half the thickness of our stock. And as I said before, the key is consistency. So if you are cutting the dados for the top shelf on the left side, cut the dados for the top shelf on the right side at the same time. That way, if there is a slight discrepancy in your measurements, both shelves will be the same. So anything that's at that level, make sure that you cut it as such and make sure that you have them all in the same alignment. Now I could sit here and show you every single dado cut, but it's really not rocket science. It's a matter of following some dimensions that are on the print, making some careful settings, and just cutting those dados to 1/4 inch deep. So I'm just going to cut them all, and I'm going to come back and see you, and we're going to try a dry fit of this particular unit. And there we have the initial dry fit of our cubby carcass, I guess you'd call it. There will be several drawers made for this particular unit. We're not quite done. We still have some kerfs to cut on between the center shelves for a couple of small dividers. But other than that, this would be the carcass minus, of course, the 3/4 inch top, which I will mill and install. So I'm going to glue this all together, and when we're done, I'll come back and see ya, and we'll move on to making some drawers for this cubby unit. And with that, the internal cubby hole assembly is now glued up here behind me, and I'm going to have to leave it overnight before I can unclamp it, give it a good sanding, and sit it in its place. Now this particular unit, of course, doesn't get fastened in that desk. It's just an entity on its own that sits in place in the upper desktop inside the Tambour. Now, there's not much more we can do with that for now, and it's a good thing because once again we've run out of time for this week's show, and that's not a bad thing. It just means we're going to have to wait until next week to see what else it's going to bring us. We've made some good progress again this week, much like we have on every week on this build, and I hope you guys are still enjoying it. But until next week, I hope you're going to join me when I bring you yet another woodworking video.